We're going to get right into the message. First, I want to ask, though, do we have any high school graduates here? I would hope that, yeah. Robin just graduated high school. Yes.
I'm a high school graduate.
Okay, I thought I had a group of people that knew what I was saying.
I'm in jobs.
Okay, did anyone recently graduate from high school? All right, so we're not celebrating that Robin just graduated from high school. All right, well, I didn't figure we'd have any high school grads in here this morning. Any college graduates, recent college graduates, you just graduated college, would you stand up? Yeah, I knew Sharon was in the back, and Sharon just graduated. Congratulations, what a huge accomplishment that is, and we want to just take a minute and celebrate those types of, that's a big accomplishment in the lives of people. And Sharon, you're right around Amy and I's age. You know that we will be graduating here soon too. Amy and I are both working on our master's level work in college right now, so I'll graduate in December. Amy will graduate in May of next year, and she'll graduate with Aaron, our oldest. So that'll be a special time for us, college graduation. Well, I can remember when I started years ago my undergraduate work at Cincinnati Christian University. I was in a leadership class, and there was a book that we read. It was called 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. As a matter of fact, Stephen Covey, he's the author of the book, Dr. Stephen Covey. He's going to come up on the screen. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And we had to read that book, and it was a book I really enjoyed reading. In fact, Stephen Covey, when he wrote that book, little did he know that that book would go on now to date to sell more than 25 million copies. In 2002, Forbes magazine, they named this book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, as one of the top 10 most influential books for leadership ever. And then a survey by Chief Executive Magazine recognized this book as one of 2 most influential books of the 20th century. I thought that's pretty awesome. You know, Stephen Covey, he passed away in 2012, but his leadership principles have had an impact around the world. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He also wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective Families. This guy had leadership principles to the core. He taught people how to lead well. Well, I couldn't help but think that that was one of only 2 of the most influential books of the 20th century. We are holding the most influential book of not only the 20th century, but of every century since the Bible's inception. If you were to look, 25 million copies, I said, now more than 25 million copies overall of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People have sold worldwide. Over 100 million Bibles are sold annually. Did you know that? It's on the bestseller list every year for many years. It's in the Guinness Book of World Records for nonfiction, because this is a nonfiction book. This is all about reality, doing life with God. And it is in the Guinness Book of World Records as the #1 book on the #1 bestseller list for more years than any other book ever. And this here has the ability to give us principles for living life with God. Amen? And so we're going to get into Exodus chapter 33. If you'll join me there. We are picking up where we left off last week. And if you remember last week, we left off that Aaron built a golden calf. And one of the things I didn't mention in that sermon was that a golden, or a calf, a bull, a cow, those things were very common idols in the Old Testament world. During the time of Moses and Aaron, there was the false god Apis, and he was worshipped by a bull, by idols of calves, of cows. And so for him to fashion this idol in the shape of a cow would have been something that he had seen time and time again. And God comes along, and Moses is on the mountain, and he tells Moses, you go down and you take your people that you led out of Egypt, because they certainly are acting like they're my people, and you go down and you confront them. And that's exactly what Moses does, doesn't he? He confronts Aaron. What have these people done? That you misled them into great sin. And then God judges that ugly evil that took place in that community. More than 3,000 people removed by the sword, then more people, more evil removed by the plague. And then we pick up in chapter 33. Notice what it says in verse 1. Then the Lord said to Moses, leave this place, you and the people you brought out of Egypt. There it is again. And go up to the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I will send an angel before you and drive out the Canaanites, Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and the Jebusites. In other words, all of the ungodly people. That angel will drive them out. Go up to the land flowing with milk and honey. Now this means that land was very productive. It was rich in produce. And God wanted to take his people there to protect them and provide so richly for them. Isn't that the life that you want? A life where God protects and provides so richly for you. And here, God wanted to take them there. But notice what he says. But I will not go with you because you are a stiff-necked people, and I might destroy you along the way. God's righteous anger because of sin and the damage and destructiveness that sin has. Not only in the life of the Israelites, but in our life too. Sin is so destructive. And God says, look, if I go, you're so stiff-necked, you don't even want my guidance. I might just judge you and destroy you completely on the way. And in verse 4, when the people heard these distressing words, they began to mourn, and no one put on ornaments. Remember all the ornaments they had? They so quickly took them off so that Aaron could throw them in a fire and meld it and fashion it into an idol. Well, none of them put on ornaments. And verse 5 tells us why. The Lord had said to Moses, tell the Israelites, you are a stiff-necked people. If I were to go with you, even for a moment, I might destroy you. Now take off your ornaments, and I will decide what to do with you. So the Israelites stripped off their ornaments at Mount Horeb. Mount Horeb, the mountain of God. Right there at Mount Sinai, they stripped off their ornaments. There is a sign of mourning here, and the mourning is that, man, we blew it. And now that we've blown it, what we recognize is that God is removing his presence from us, his blessing, and people are mourning over this. And what we learn is the way that Moses lived his life, and the way that he responds here gives us 7 principles. In fact, it gives us 7 habits. We form habits in our life, right? We have habits that are healthy, right? Like our eating habits. I can tell you my eating habits aren't always healthy. What I do is find myself yo-yoing. And I know people go, Greg, you don't have to worry about dieting. Yes, I do. I'm getting older. I got to take care of my health. I've got to keep up with my kids. I want to watch my grandkids grow. Anyone else feel the same way? I got to take care of my health, but I've got some unhealthy habits when it comes to diet, and I can't get away with it in my 40s the way I did in my 20s. Anyone else feel the same way? I've got to create amens from our audience. But you know what? I got to create some new habits, right? Better healthy habits. Exercise. We have unhealthy habits, right? If we sit around on the couch and we talk about getting healthy, it doesn't happen, does it? We've got to create some habits that get us out of the house, get us in the gym, and get us working out. A healthy, active lifestyle. Well, we've created unhealthy habits in our walk with God, haven't we? In our relationship with God. And if we're ever going to live out Mark 12:30 and 31, to love the Lord our God with all of our heart, with all of our mind, with all our soul, with all our strength, that's all-encompassing. That's what I call holistic health, is that when we are loving God with our heart, our mind, our soul, our strength, man, can you imagine what kind of relationship we'd have with the Lord? And then he says the second greatest command is to love your neighbors yourself. These are the 2 greatest commandments. Why? Because if we're loving God and we're loving others, we fulfill the commandments of God. It's that much simpler. So Moses, look at his response. He's going to give us 7 habits of effective Christians. Notice in verse 7, now Moses used to take a tent and pitch it outside of the camp, some distance away, calling it the tent of meetings. Anyone inquiring of the Lord would go to the tent of meetings outside the camp, and whenever Moses went out to the tent, all the people rose and stood at the entrances to their tents, watching Moses until he entered the tent. As Moses went into the tent, the pillar of cloud would come down and stay at the entrance while the Lord spoke with Moses. Whenever the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance to the tent, they also stood. They stood and they worshiped, each at the entrance of his tent. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face as a man speaks with his friend. Then Moses would return to the camp. But his young aide Joshua, son of Nun, did not leave the tent. You see, what we see here is Moses. He is responding to God, and he doesn't just wait on the Lord to show up, right? He doesn't sit on the couch and say, my faith in God's just going to grow, my relationship is going to go. No, what he does is he gives us a habit of a highly effective follower of God, a highly effective Christian, and he looked forward to the coming of the Messiah. He looked forward to Jesus. You and I look back. Jesus has come. He did die on the cross. He was buried and dead. He was raised from the dead on the third day, and he ascended into heaven at the right hand of the Father. He is in full power and authority over all creation, right? And so when we think about Moses, he's looking forward to the coming of Jesus Christ, the Savior, yes. And we look back knowing that Jesus has come. And he fulfilled everything he promised to fulfill on our behalf. And look at what else Moses does. Moses said to the Lord, verse 12, he said to the Lord, you have been telling me, leave these people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. What did God say? I'm not going. I'm not going. And Moses is saying, you're not going. Who will you send with me that will impact the people or lead the people as effectively as you? Well, we find out that Moses knows there is no other. Because in verse 13, if you are pleased with me, teach me your ways so I may know you and continue to find favor with you. Remember, this nation is your people. And look how the Lord replies. The Lord replied, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. 7 habits of highly effective Christians. Number 1, they are proactive in seeking God. They're proactive. Moses didn't wait. He didn't say, hey, God's just going to show up and shazam, I'm going to have this deep relationship with him. No, he proactively pursued the Lord. He went out and he not only built the tent, he stayed there. He waited on the Lord. He met with him. And he says, look, if you found favor with me, teach me your ways so that I may know you. Moses already knew God. Here's what he's saying, so that I may know you more, so that I can know you deeper. And I just have to ask, is this a habit in our life that we are proactive in seeking the Lord? Are we proactive in seeking God? You know, one of the habits I was taught to build years ago when I decided to go off to Bible college, a few older guys in the faith who were in ministry, they took me under their wing. One of them was Gary Johnson at Indian Creek Christian Church. And he became my spiritual father. And you know what I did? I watched what he did. And he would wake up early in the morning. Didn't matter if we were here and he was at his house. He'd wake up early in the morning and he'd meet with God in his word. And he had a certain study habit before he even began his day. And he said, you know what? This will benefit you if you do this. And so I started to do it, and I started to see major differences in my life. And not only that, Amy said, man, the guys that are around you and the time that you're spending studying is transforming your life. And it had a huge benefit on our marriage. Still impacts our marriage to this day because it's a habit I have. I wake up early in the morning. 4 a.m. I set my clock. I'm sure that for years Amy's wanted to say, will you shut that stupid alarm off? But you know what? She's never complained. I set it at 4 a.m. and I get up at 4 a.m. most days and I start my study and I go down and I read in the living room. I've got a place where I sit and where I pray and where I've got a study habit. I do it early in the morning. You want to know why? My schedule is just like yours. It doesn't take long before my day can get completely out of whack with the busyness of life. And I just happen to think that it would benefit you if you would get up early in the morning before your day begins. I know that people practice all kinds of different study habits. Some people do it at night. But I can tell you that when I come to the Lord at night, my day is still going through my mind. And at night, I'm thinking about all the things I didn't accomplish. I'm already making my list for the other day, and I'm speaking your language because you got smiles on your face. See, we're a lot the same, aren't we? And we have to set a habit where we are proactively seeking the Lord in the Word, in prayer. It transforms our life. It transforms us. And Moses, he did that. He didn't just do it once. He did it. It was a pattern in his life. It was a habit. How long does it take to form a habit in your life? Professionals say what? 21 days. You know, you've read these books. You've heard 21 days. I would just say, look, do it for 21 days and then keep doing it. Keep going beyond and form a habit in your life where you are proactive in your seeking of the Lord. Well, he continues and he gives us a second habit. And if you'll notice, he continues, how will people distinguish your people from the people of other nations, the people groups around us? And he realizes that it's the presence of God in their life as a community that was going to distinguish them. And people would look and say, that is a group of people that are different. They are who they say they are. They really believe because they really follow. And Moses, God puts him in the cleft of a rock. And if you remember, he says, I'm going to cover your face with my hand. God puts his hand in the face of Moses. That's right. And he passes by. And in chapter 34, we see that as God passes by, God only allows Moses to see his back. You know, his back. No one can see actually God face to face. God does life with Moses face to face, but he doesn't see God's face. He allows him to see his back. He tells him in chapter 34, you fashioned 2 new tablets. You remember he shattered the first 2 stone tablets out of righteous anger for what was going on in the camp. He throws them and shatters those 2 tablets. You cannot take those tablets to fix my phone, right? You have to, God says, you fashion 2 new ones. And when he fashions those, he calls him back up on the mountain for another 40 days. How long was he going the first time? 40 days. 40 more days he fasted, no food, no water, and God sustains him on that mountain. He gives him instructions. And notice some of the instructions that he gives. For instance, in verse 10 of chapter 34, the Lord said, I am making a covenant with you. Now this is actually a renewal of the covenant they already had that they broke. Did God break the covenant? Nope. God keeps his word. He keeps his promise. But here he says, I am making a covenant with you before all your people. I will do wonders never before done in any nation in all the world. The people you live among will see how awesome is the work that I, the Lord, will do for you. Obey what I command you today. I will drive out before you the Amorites, Canaanites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Again, all of the pagan people. I will drive them out. But you be careful not to make a treaty. You don't make an agreement with those who live in the land where you are going, or they will be a snare among you. Break down their altars, smash their sacred stones, and cut down their Asherah poles. Do not worship any other god, no false gods. For the Lord, whose name is what? Jealous, is a jealous God. Now there is unhealthy jealousy in relationships, right? But this is a healthy, God-honoring, holy jealousy, and it means intolerant of rivalry. God will not have anyone before him. No one, nothing. He will not take second place. He won't sit in second seat. What he wants from us is us to place him number 1 on our heart, and he will not settle for anything less. And when we put him in a different place, his hand of blessing will be removed from our life, just like it was with the Israelites. But he gives this, do not, and he continues, be careful, verse 15, not to make a treaty with those who live in the land, for when they prostitute themselves to their false gods and sacrifice to them, they will invite you and you will eat their sacrifices. In other words, you will be tempted to do what they do. And you're going to fall for it. And then he talks about marriage. He says this, and when you choose some of their daughters as wives for your sons, and those daughters prostitute themselves to their gods, they will lead your sons to do the same. Do not make cast idols. And then he goes on to talk about how we celebrate communion and community with God. But notice what he says, do not. In other words, you've got to learn to say no. And a second habit of highly effective Christians is they learn to say no. They learn to say no to things that get in the way of our relationship with God. They learn to say no to things that are not healthy for our relationship with God. And that is a great habit to have. You see, what we do is we fill our schedule so full, don't we? It's so full. And we can't possibly take a rest. We can't possibly take a break. We can't possibly sit still and spend time with God. Instead, our schedules are so full because we can't say no. We can't say no. And even as a pastor, at times, we get caught up saying yes to things that might be good things, but it's going to fill the schedule, right? It's going to be so tight that I can't even spend time in my own spiritual health. And what's more important? That's more important to me. I've got to be healthy for other people. You know, Amy was in the house last night, and it was awesome. She said, you know what? I'm so grateful that we have only become healthier as Christians. In our marriage and individually, we've become healthier because there are so many people around us that we get to benefit. And when you are constantly trying to benefit other people, it can empty your tank, can't it? You've got to take time to fill your tank. And if you're going to do that, you've got to learn to say no. And you certainly got to learn to say no to things that aren't healthy, like actions that do not honor God. That's why Amy and I, we practice, we've drawn a line of where we're willing to go physically, emotionally, financially. We've drawn a line. We will not cross that line. We want to be healthy in our marriage. We want to be healthy for other people. We want to be healthy for this church. So we just simply learn to say no. He continues and he gives us a third habit. And if you'll notice in chapter 34, the end of verse 20, join me there. No one is to appear before me empty-handed. Now he's bringing in this idea of having a vision for your life. And not only a vision for your life about how we are going to honor God, the type of life we want to offer to God. No one should show up empty-handed. But before that, as he talks about marriage and he talks about the way we ought to have our life lined out, then he teaches us another habit that you and I ought to have in our lives. And it's that a healthy Christian will practice this habit. They have a vision for the future. They have a vision for the future. We don't sit back and we don't just go through life and go, hey, it's just going to happen. No, when I think about marriage for my kids, I personally, as a parent, I have a vision for them. Like I want someone who's equally yoked with them, who's in love with Jesus. And I've told all of my kids, Aaron, Erica, Victor, Caleb, you ask them. We've said this for years. If you don't find someone who loves Jesus more than you, they won't love you for long. Because love is a decision. And if people haven't decided to love God, then in 1 John it says we don't even know what love is if we don't know God. And I don't want those kinds of people in my kids' life because they're going to have broken hearts and they're going to have broken families. And my grandchildren may be raised in a broken home. I have a vision. And what I hope is that my kids have a vision for their life, for marriage and the type of person they want to allow in, that they want to spend their life with here. And not only that, that they have a vision for their own personal life about how they're going to pursue God in their life so that they are not only living a life that is full of blessing, but that they are a benefit to others. And then Moses plays off of this idea of no one should come to me empty-handed. You know what we do in life? We tend to act like we own it, don't we? I mean, you think about it. We own our future. We own our finances. We even think at times we own the church. But the church belongs to God. And we have to live empty-handed. And Moses says, look, don't come to God empty-handed. God is telling him, you tell the people that. Don't come to me empty-handed. And then notice in verse 26, bring the best of your first fruits. And this brings us into the fourth habit of the 7 habits of highly effective Christians, is that they bring the best. They bring God their best. What an awesome habit that we should all want in our life. We bring God our best. Do we have the best attitude in life? Do we come to God with the best attitude? Do we come to God with the best actions, longing to live our lives the way that God calls us to live our lives? Do we bring God our best? And here he's talking about bringing an offering to the Lord. Man, if people were to look at the way we spend money, do we bring God our best? If people were to look at our schedule, do we bring God our best? You see, this is a very important habit of highly effective Christians. That when we wake up, we have an attitude throughout the day, every day, that God, I just want to bring you my very best. Aristotle said this. He said, excellence is not a singular act, it's a habit. Excellence is not a singular act, it's a habit. You are what you repeatedly do. You are what you repeatedly do. That quote stood out to me this week as I was studying. I ended up sending out an email this week, and I just asked people, hey, would you respond to how God is working in your life? I mean, we've learned so much this year, haven't we, throughout Scripture? And I had a few people share with me a couple of emails just about what God's doing in their life. And Tara's always given me the open floor to share whatever she sends, but she's always so encouraging about your marriage and your family, and about Deegan, what's going on in her life. And one of the things Tara shared with me is she said, this year, being at Remedy Christian Church, studying through the key events, it has challenged me and taught me to be more content. She's more content in her life than she's ever been. She said it's affected the family. The family is spending so much good time together, and the marriage is so strong, and Deegan's being raised in a strong Christian home with Ryan and Tara, and I'm so grateful to get that kind of an email because it's affecting the next generation, a habit of doing things with excellence within the home. It's a powerful email. But then I got one from Kathy, and it's no surprise because Kathy and Jack have been growing here, and it's been noticeable. And Kathy just talked about how she is growing in such strong relationships here. She said, I've got friends here at this church who accept me, who are helping me grow in different ways in her life. And she even bragged about Jack, how he's put up with her for all these years. But I think it's the other way around, Kathy. But I just think that that's so incredible that people's lives are being changed because habits are being formed that are having a profound impact, not just on you, but on other people, right? And as we get back into the Word, we actually notice a fifth habit that Moses teaches us. If you were to look with me in chapter 35, we notice that there's a willingness of people. Willingness. And in chapter 35, for instance, in verse, start with me in verse 4, it says, Moses said to the whole Israelite community, this is what the Lord has commanded. From what you have, take an offering for the Lord, everyone who is what? Willing. There's that word willing. And if you look with me in verse 10, all who were skilled were called. How many of us here have skills and abilities given to us by God? How many of us have them? Every one of us should have our hands up right now. And that's exactly what God wanted, was for the whole community to say, we're in. And in verse 20 it says, then the whole Israelite community withdrew from Moses' presence, and everyone who was willing. Everyone who was willing. Verse 22, all who were willing. In verse 29, all the Israelite men and women who were willing. You see, there's something there that we notice. Some people were willing to seek God on a very deep level. Some were willing to pursue God and obey His commands and take His challenge. And we know that because then there's another word that's repeated for 3 chapters. More than 30 times this word is mentioned in chapters 35, 36, and 37. It's the word they. They. In other words, a fifth habit of a highly effective Christian is that they bring other people along. They know that you cannot do it alone and that you shouldn't do it alone. We need other people around us, right? And you know, Christianity, Christian community, it is all about team. I need people around me. And I need to be drawing people along and challenging them to grow in their faith. In order for that to happen, I have to be growing in my faith. So I would just pause here and I would say, are you drawing people along? Are you bringing people along on the journey? Do you have people around you who are allowed to do life with you, speak truth into your life, share life with you, grow with you, study with you? Do you have those kinds of people? Have you invited people in by sharing with them the process of salvation and saying, you know what, I will grow with you simply by sitting down, teaching you how to study, showing you what it looks like to pray, showing you what it looks like to serve? Would you come with me? Are we bringing people along on this incredible journey? Turn with me to chapter 39. God, He's given all of these instructions, how to build the tabernacle, how to build all of its furnishings, how to build the Ark of the Covenant that the Ten Commandments were in, how to build the ephod and everything that Aaron and the priesthood would wear, because they were holy and set apart. And then we get to chapter 39, just as He's giving the order of priesthood and the garments. And notice with me, in chapter 39, actually chapter 40, I apologize. Well, you know what? Let me find the chapter that I'm actually looking for. This is what happens, isn't it? There is accountability that takes place with not only Aaron, but the entire Israelite community. Here it is. It is chapter 39. I apologize. Verse 42. The Israelites had done all the work just as the Lord had commanded Moses. Moses inspected the work and he saw that they had done it just as the Lord had commanded. So Moses blessed them. There is a powerful habit that we see that's formed here in the Israelite community. And Moses here, he has accountability with him. Did you notice? He could have said, oh, the work's done, right? Hey, let's just set everything up. But that's not what he does. God says you are to inspect the work. You're to have some accountability with the community. You bring them together and you look and you make sure that they have obeyed everything that I command. And here we notice habit number 6 is that they welcome accountability. Did you notice what the community didn't do? What they did was they brought it to Moses, right? And he said, I'm going to inspect this. And they go, what? You don't think my work's good enough? You don't see that, do you? No, what you see is that Moses inspects the work. He has this accountability with him. And then notice what happens next. Moses inspected it and he saw that they did everything the Lord had commanded. And so Moses blessed them. He blessed them. The people at that point were welcoming accountability. And there should be people around us in our life in which we welcome accountability, who are able to look into our life and say, you know what, Greg, you say one thing here, but here's what I notice in your life is that you're not actually living that out. Or, Greg, I see this unhealthy pattern in your life, or I see this destructive thing that you're seeking. And Greg, you're in the wrong place right now. You're listening to the wrong people, and you're longing for the wrong things. I've got people in my life who hold me accountable. I've done it for years, and it is life transforming. Just ask anyone who practices that type of relationship. It is life changing. Do you welcome accountability in your life? Is it a habit that you've set up? Are you still longing for the wrong things, landing in the wrong places because you're listening to the wrong people? Exodus 23:2, remember what Moses said, do not join the crowd in doing what is wrong. And then finally, Moses teaches us one final habit of highly effective Christians. And if you look with me in verse 17 of chapter 40, so the tabernacle was set up on the first day of the first month in the second year. When Moses set up the tabernacle, he put the base in place, erected the frames, inserted the crossbars, and he set up the posts. And he goes on to do everything that he was supposed to do with the tabernacle. The tabernacle is now set up, and tabernacle, by the way, means dwelling place, which means that it is a place where God wants to dwell with us. I had a friend ask me a question. He's in ministry. He asked me this question this week. He said, how are we allowing God to tabernacle with us? That's not a common question we hear, is it? Well, the word tabernacle in Hebrew means dwelling. And here's what he's asking. See, we can come to church on a Sunday morning, right? And we can learn how God dwells with us. And we can leave here feeling good because we've sang some songs and we've studied some of His Word and we've prayed together. Spent some time in community. But what do the other 6 days of the week look like for us? Are we structuring our lives in a way that God dwells with us on a daily basis? Where we open the doors, inviting Him into our daily life, our daily routine, our daily practices. Is God dwelling with us because we have opened the door and invited Him in? And here Moses, structuring that tabernacle, that tent of meetings, in the center of community, was putting God at the center of everything. And that's what Moses wanted more than anything else. Is that what we want? And he teaches us this last habit that's so important. In verse 34 of chapter 40, then the cloud covered the tent of meetings, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Moses could not enter the tabernacle. Moses could not enter the tent of meetings because the cloud had settled upon it. And the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Who was in the cloud? God was in the cloud. And He showed up in the cloud because people could not see Him face to face. He was that holy. He is that holy. And He covers the tabernacle. His presence filled the tabernacle. Verse 36, in all the travels of the Israelites. How long did they travel in the desert? 40 years. 40 years they wandered in the desert. Is that what God had for them? No. God had the promised land in mind, and they wandered as part of judgment because they didn't take the promise God gave them in the beginning. And God, He's still there. He's still doing life with them. And it says, whenever the cloud lifted from above the tabernacle, they would set out. But if the cloud did not lift, they did not set out until the day it lifted. So the cloud of the Lord was over the tabernacle by day, and the fire was in the cloud by night, in the sight of all the house of Israel during all their travels. Here is a final habit of highly effective Christians. They wait on the Lord. They learn to wait on the Lord. Did you notice when the cloud lifts and it moves, then you are to move because God will go ahead of you. But when the cloud settles and it is settled on that tent of meetings, on the tabernacle, you wait. You wait. And I got to tell you, this is a habit that not many of us have formed, waiting on the Lord. We want what we want, right? And we learned that the American way is, I can get what I want, right? And guess what? What we've wanted has got in the way of what we've needed. And what we need is Jesus. We need Jesus again to be the center of our life. We need to start dwelling with God in an amazing way so that God can transform our lives, so that we can be the people that God has called us to be, and so that we can be a blessing in this world to people rather than a burden. Listen, maybe you formed some bad habits. Maybe you have bad habits when it comes to your relationship with God, and you just realize that these 7 habits have to be played out in your life. It's not too late. We can make the changes today, and we can begin to form new habits. The only way to break old habits is to make new habits. Habits that are healthy for our relationship with God. Because you and I both know, all of us know, not both of us, there's more than 2 of us here. I say goofy stuff sometimes, don't I? But one thing that's not goofy, this is reality, is that whatever it is that's going on in our life, Jesus is the only remedy. He's the only remedy. So let's form some God-centered habits that transform our life so that we can make Jesus the remedy in the lives of people around us.